Racist cops arrest a black woman. Their faces drop when they learn her husband is the police chief. No one ever thinks that a peaceful evening can turn into a nightmare in just a few short minutes. But for Maya Brooks, that was nothing new. As a civil rights attorney, she had witnessed far too many cases where the color of a person's skin dictated how they were treated under the harsh glow of flashing red and blue lights. She had defended clients pulled over without cause, suspected of crimes with no evidence, and treated as criminals simply because they didn't fit the biases of those in power. But never did she imagine she'd become part of that story herself. That night, she was just driving home. Maya exhaled deeply as she navigated the quiet suburban streets of Brookhaven, Georgia. The weight of the day pressed against her shoulders, but a familiar sense of relief washed over her as she neared home. She had spent the last 10 hours locked in a relentless legal battle, advocating for a black teenager unfairly expelled from school. It had been exhausting, but this was her calling, fighting systemic bias, challenging abuse of authority, ensuring the law served everyone, not just those in power. Her sleek black sedan glided smoothly down the road, moving at a steady 32 miles per hour in a 35 zone. The neighborhood was peaceful, bathed in the warm glow of porch lights. A small smile played on her lips as she thought about Daniel, her husband, likely already home, unwinding after his own long day. Then, out of nowhere, red and blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror. The sirens pierced the stillness, a sharp warning slicing through the night. Maya's hands instinctively tightened on the steering wheel. She wasn't speeding. No traffic violations. Her registration was up to date. Yet, she knew better than to immediately question it. With a steady breath, she turned on her signal and pulled over under a street lamp. Better to stay visible. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had been in this moment before, not personally, but through her clients, through the stories she had defended in court. Stay calm. Keep your hands visible. No sudden movements. 2 officers emerged from the patrol car. One, tall and broad-shouldered, approached with an air of dominance. The other, younger, smirked as he moved, his casual stance laced with an undertone of condescension. Maya rolled down her window, her face unreadable. The taller officer rapped on her window with his flashlight. License and registration. No greeting. No explanation. Maya retrieved them smoothly, handing them over without a word. "You in a hurry tonight?" the younger officer asked, tilting his head as he peered into the car. She kept her voice measured. "Not at all, officer. Just heading home." The tall one, Officer Hale, narrowed his eyes. "You swerved back there." Looked distracted. Maya's brows furrowed, but she maintained her even tone. "I was driving straight. If there's dashcam footage proving otherwise, I'd be happy to review it." Hale's jaw tightened. He didn't like being challenged. The younger officer, Officer Reed, let out a short chuckle. "Dashcam, huh? Look at that, we got a legal expert here." He scanned the documents. No priors. No warrants. His tone held a trace of disappointment. Hale leaned in closer, his flashlight sweeping over the car's interior. "You got anything in here we should know about?" Maya met his gaze without flinching. "Like what?" Hale smirked. "Drugs? Weapons? Anything you forgot to mention?" Her voice remained composed. "I'm an attorney. I know my rights. I'd like to know the real reason you pulled me over." Reed scoffed, exchanging a glance with Hale. "Step out of the vehicle." Hale's voice was sharp. Maya's pulse quickened, but her tone stayed firm. "On what grounds?" Reed smirked, resisting an investigation. Maya clenched her jaw. This was escalating, fast. Before she could say another word, Hale yanked open the door, his grip firm as cold metal clamped around her wrists. The sting of the handcuffs cut into her skin. "This is an illegal stop," she said through gritted teeth. They had no idea who they were messing with. Maya refused to show them even a flicker of fear. Yeah, Reed muttered dismissively. "Tell it to the judge." The squad car door slammed shut behind her, the enclosed space suddenly feeling much smaller than before. As the car rolled forward, She caught sight of silhouettes behind house windows, neighbors peeking through their blinds, watching, but doing nothing. She inhaled deeply, exhaling slowly. They don't know who I am. That will be their biggest mistake. Maya sat stiffly in the back of the patrol car, the cold bite of the handcuffs pressing into her wrists. The quiet hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the police radio were the only sounds filling the tense space. In the front seats, Officers Hale and Reed carried on a casual conversation, as if arresting a black woman on flimsy charges was just another routine part of their night. So what do you think? Reckless driving, or should we go with resisting? Reed asked, smirking as he glanced back at Maya through the rearview mirror. Hale let out a low chuckle. They always resist, don't they? Always think they're smarter than the badge. Maya's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. She knew better than to engage. It would only feed their egos. She had seen it all before. Officers who thrived on the illusion of power, who believed authority gave them the right to humiliate those they deemed beneath them. Instead, she focused on controlling her breathing. Stay calm. Stay in control. Her mind raced through the legal options available to her. She could already envision the courtroom, the case she would build against them, every procedural violation, every abuse of power. The squad car pulled into the precinct. The moment the doors unlocked, Hale yanked the back door open and gripped her arm firmly, pulling her out. Let go, Maya said sharply. Hale smirked but didn't loosen his grip. She straightened her posture as she stepped out, refusing to let them see any fear. The fluorescent lights of the precinct cast a harsh, sterile glow as she was led inside. Other officers barely spared her a glance. They had seen this before, probably dozens of times. A black woman brought in, handcuffed, for no reason other than existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. No one intervened. Reed led her down a narrow hallway and into a small holding room, cold, unwelcoming, with metal benches and a barred door. He removed her cuffs with an almost mocking flourish. Sit tight, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. We'll figure out what to charge you with soon enough. Hale chuckled. Or maybe we won't. Maybe we just let you cool off in here for a bit. They exchanged smug glances before stepping out, the metal door clanging shut behind them. Maya exhaled slowly, rolling her wrists to ease the soreness where the cuffs had dug into her skin. She refused to sit. Instead, she stood near the bars, listening. Just outside, their voices carried through the quiet corridor. She's got a mouth on her, Reed muttered. Hale snorted. Yeah, but she'll learn. They always do. Maya's stomach churned with anger, but she forced herself to remain composed. She had spent her career fighting for people who had been in this exact situation. Now, it was happening to her, and she knew the game they were playing. Keep her here long enough to make her sweat. Intimidate her just enough to make her feel powerless. But they had no idea who they had just arrested. Minutes dragged into an hour. Maya leaned against the cool metal bars, her patience unwavering. Then footsteps. Firm. Purposeful. A new voice entered the conversation, one with authority. What's this? The voice was sharp, questioning. Reed responded lazily. Reckless driving. Resisting. Silence. Then a sigh. And did you review any actual evidence before bringing her in? Maya turned slightly, watching as a new figure stepped into view. A senior officer, older, with a hardened expression. His badge read Lieutenant Harris. Hale shrugged. Didn't need to. She was acting suspicious. Harris glanced down at the file in his hands, flipping through it quickly. Maya saw the exact moment his expression shifted. His brows furrowed deeply. His grip on the folder tightened slightly. When he lifted his gaze back to Hale and Reed, something unreadable flickered in his eyes. Then, his voice was calm, but firm. You too. Stay here. Before turning and walking briskly away, Maya exhaled slowly, knowing exactly what was about to happen. Lieutenant Harris's footsteps were sharp and deliberate as he exited the holding area, his phone already in his hand, dialing with urgency. Maya didn't need to hear the conversation to know exactly who he was calling. And the moment that call was answered, everything would change. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity, but Maya remained steady. The precinct bustled around her, officers moving through their routines, unaware that a storm was about to hit. Officers Hale and Reed remained by the desk, still chatting idly, smug in their belief that they had handled just another routine stop. They had no idea that their night was about to take a sharp turn. Then the front doors of the precinct swung open, and the entire atmosphere in the room shifted in an instant. Maya didn't need to turn around to know who had just walked in. She could feel it, the sheer weight of his presence, the authority in his measured steps, the silence that swallowed the room whole. Daniel Brooks had arrived. Her husband, the chief of police of Brookhaven, Georgia, stepped into the room like a force of nature. He was still in full uniform, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. But Maya knew him better than anyone. She recognized the simmering storm beneath his controlled demeanor. The moment officers Hale and Reed saw him, their smugness evaporated. Reed's smirk vanished entirely, and Hale, for the first time that night, looked truly uncertain. Daniel stopped in the center of the room, his dark eyes sweeping over the space with slow precision before locking onto Lieutenant Harris. "Where is she?" His voice wasn't raised, but it carried through the entire precinct like a command. Harris wasted no time. "Holding cell, sir." Daniel didn't acknowledge him further. He was already moving. Maya heard the jingle of keys, the quiet click of a lock, and then her cell door swung open. She turned, meeting Daniel's gaze, and for a moment, the tension cracked just slightly. His eyes softened for just a fraction of a second, a silent exchange of understanding between them. Then, his attention snapped back to the officers who had arrested her. Daniel stepped out of the holding area, his presence looming as he faced Hale and Reed directly. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them could. His voice was measured, quiet, but laced with something heavy and dangerous. "I want to see the arrest footage." The room was silent. No one moved. "I said now." Lieutenant Harris moved first, grabbing the nearest monitor and pulling up the body cam footage. Other officers in the precinct gathered closer, drawn to the unfolding moment, realizing now that this situation wasn't going to be brushed aside. The footage played. The silence that followed was deafening. There was no reckless driving, no resisting arrest, no aggression. Only two officers escalating a situation for no reason other than their own prejudice. Daniel watched the screen with an expression so still it was almost unreadable. Then, slowly, he turned back to Hale and Reed. "You're suspended. Effective immediately." Hale's mouth opened, but Daniel cut him off with a single look. "If you think for a second that I'll tolerate this kind of behavior in my department, you are sorely mistaken." His voice was quiet, yet it filled every corner of the precinct. "You will not disgrace this badge any longer." Reed looked stunned, his mouth slightly agape, as if he hadn't actually believed there would be consequences. Hale's hands curled into fists at his sides, but he knew better than to speak now. Daniel's gaze swept across the room, ensuring that every officer present understood exactly what had just happened. As Maya Brooks and her husband, Chief Daniel Brooks, stepped out of the precinct, the weight of the night settled between them. This wasn't just about her. It was bigger than that. It was about accountability, about change, about standing against a system that too often protected those who misused their power. The cold night air wrapped around them, but neither shivered. The fire burning inside them was far stronger than the chill. Daniel walked her to the car, his movements still tight with controlled anger. He opened the passenger door, waiting as Maya slid in. Her posture was straight, her expression composed, but he could feel the tension radiating from her. He shut the door, moved around to the driver's side, and got in. But he didn't start the car. Instead, he gripped the steering wheel, so tightly his knuckles turned white. Maya watched him. "I'm fine," she said, her voice measured. Daniel exhaled sharply through his nose, turning to her. His gaze searched hers, not for weakness, but for something deeper. "I should have been there sooner." Maya let out a quiet, almost bitter laugh. "Sooner, Daniel? They had me in there for hours before someone even bothered to check who I was." His jaw tightened. "That's not the point." He turned to face her fully. The point is, they had no right to stop you in the first place. They were looking for an excuse. And when they couldn't find one, they made one. Maya drummed her fingers against her thigh. And how many other people have they done this to? People who don't have a police chief for a husband. Daniel didn't answer right away, because he knew the answer. He had spent his entire career trying to root out officers like Hale and Reed, officers who saw the badge as a shield rather than a responsibility. And yet, even as chief, he couldn't stop them all. But this time, he wasn't letting it go. Not this time. His voice was firm. Maya didn't argue. She knew he meant it. The drive home was silent, but not in a way that felt empty. It was the silence before a storm. The next morning, Daniel arrived at his office earlier than usual. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden glow over the city as he stepped into police headquarters. His assistant, Anita, looked up from her desk, startled. "Chief Brooks, get me everything on Officers Hale and Reed." His voice was clipped, firm. Every complaint, every flag report, every internal review they've been involved in. Anita nodded quickly, already pulling up the files. Minutes later, she walked into his office and placed a thick folder on his desk. "Everything you asked for." Daniel flipped it open. His stomach twisted as he scanned the pages. Excessive force complaints. Multiple reports of racial profiling. Mysterious evidence losses in key cases. None of it had led to formal discipline. Not once. Daniel clenched his jaw. Not anymore. He picked up the phone, his voice hard as steel. "Open an internal review. Effective immediately. Both officers are suspended pending investigation." The voice on the other end hesitated. "Sir, this is going to make waves." Daniel's expression darkened. "Good." Shock waves through the department. By the afternoon, word had spread. The suspension of Officers Hale and Reed sent shock waves through the department. Whispers echoed through the hallways. Some officers exchanged uneasy glances. Others stood still, shifting uncomfortably under the weight of unspoken truths. But Daniel didn't care about their whispers. He had called a mandatory precinct meeting, and as the room filled with officers, he stood at the front, his presence commanding, his expression unreadable. When the room was silent, he spoke. "What happened last night was unacceptable." His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a gunshot. "Two of our officers abused their authority. They made an unlawful stop, fabricated reasons to escalate the situation, and wrongfully detained a citizen." His gaze swept across the room. "This is not an isolated incident. This is a pattern that has been ignored for far too long." A few officers shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down. Others looked resentful. Daniel had expected that. Not everyone wanted change. Some thrived under the old system. "I won't tolerate it." His voice hardened. "If you wear this badge, you will honor it. You will serve this community with integrity. If you can't do that, if you think you can hide behind the weight of this department to shield you from consequences, let me be clear. You are mistaken." The room was dead silent. Daniel let the weight of his words settle before delivering the final blow. "This department is under review. Effective immediately." A ripple of tension shot through the room. "There will be mandatory bias training, stricter oversight on all stops and arrests, and an independent committee to review all misconduct complaints." His gaze locked onto the room. "And if you have a problem with that, you can turn in your badge now." Silence. No one moved. No one dared. Daniel nodded, satisfied. Dismissed. As officers filtered out, some murmuring, some silent, Daniel remained standing, watching. He wasn't naive. He knew change wouldn't happen overnight. But today, a shift had begun. And that was enough to build on. Meanwhile, across town, Maya sat in her office. Her phone buzzed with messages. Colleagues, reporters, even former clients. Some sent messages of support. Others asked if she was pressing charges. She wasn't sure how to answer that yet. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. Her assistant peeked in. "There's someone here to see you." Before Maya could respond, a young man stepped inside. Barely 20. His hands twisted together nervously. His eyes filled with a mix of admiration and uncertainty. "Mrs. Brooks," he said quietly, "I just wanted to say what happened to you. It could have been me." He swallowed hard. "It has been me. More times than I can count." A beat of silence. I just wanted to say thank you for not letting it slide." Something tightened in Maya's chest. She stood, offering him her hand. "You don't have to thank me," she said, voice steady. "But you do have to keep speaking up. Keep fighting." He nodded. His grip was firm. As he left, Maya sat back down, staring at her phone again. A message from Daniel popped up. "Dinner tonight? No distractions. Just us." She smiled, typing back. Looking forward to it. The fight wasn't over. It never would be. But tonight? Tonight, they had won something. And sometimes that was enough.